there, and welcome to the Cory Doctorow podcast. I'm Cory Doctorow. This is my podcast. I have some great news. I finished the story, Martian Chronicles, that I've been reading to you for the last month or so. I should finish reading it to you probably by the end of January. I submitted it to the editor who bought it, Jonathan Strawn, who will be publishing it in his Life on Mars anthology, and he really likes it. He said he thought it was the first third of a novel, which, I don't know. I don't think it'll be. I've got lots of work to do on the next novel, the next YA novel that I'm going to write before I even think about doing another one, and that one is going to be called Pirate Cinema, and the treatment for it's really been coming along. I think it's going to be a kick-ass book. You may notice that I sound slightly better this week. That's because I finally found a new pop filter for my little Plantronics headset. I gave up on actually buying one. Nobody really seems to sell them, at least not in the UK. I found a couple in the kind of £20 range, which was about $30 for a tiny little piece of foam rubber, which I completely rejected. So I solved this problem by the simple expedient of stealing the microphone cover off of one of my wife's Xbox headsets. Now we're good. And she doesn't need it because nobody she shouts at while she's killing zombies cares if she pops. Some writerly news. Excuse me. Some writerly news from the week. Many of you who read Boing Boing or Crap Hound saw the story about my friend and colleague Peter Watts, a Canadian science fiction writer who helped a friend move to Nebraska. He rented a car, drove to Nebraska. The car broke down. They gave him an SUV to drive home from the rental agency. And he was crossing back into Canada at the Port Huron crossing in Michigan when he was searched. His car was searched by US DHS officers at an exit check. And he got out of his car and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Get in your car." And he said, "But what are you doing?" And they pepper sprayed him and then, in his words, beat the shit out of him. And then put him in jail and then charged him with felony assault on a federal officer. So many of us were quite shocked and appalled by this because we know Peter and we know he's the kind of guy who might get out of the car and say, "But what are you doing?" But we also know he's the kind of guy who would never assault a federal officer. He's got a PhD in marine biology, likes hanging out with dolphins. He's not a two-fisted brawler. So many of us got together and raised money for him online, as did many of you, and I've heard from Peter to say that they have actually raised an appreciable sum of money, enough that they think that they'll be able to mount his defense, which is good news, because if you screw up on felony assault on a federal officer, not only does it screw up your ability to travel for the rest of your life, but he could go to jail for years on the back of this. So yeah, He's very grateful, and I'm very grateful to all of you who contributed. This is my worst nightmare. It's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thought of being arrested in a foreign country on a trumped-up charge by an unaccountable police service like that at the border. So thank you all. That was a little bit of a Christmas miracle that everyone came together for that. On the subject of Christmas miracles, my physiotherapy continues very well. The Feldenkrais guy I've been seeing is just amazing. I've been going to Pure Sport here in London, and my Feldenkrais guy has given me all these very gentle, very good exercises that really seem to be making a huge difference in mobilizing my frozen lumbar and sacral spine, such that I'm actually able to start moving again, and it doesn't hurt to sit. Doesn't hurt to lie down. It's quite good. I'm really very happy with the results and looking forward to more sessions with him. I have started work on a new short story. I don't have a title for it yet. It's a very short story, probably only 2,000 words, 2,500 words when it's done, and it's for some Open University ubiquitous computing curriculum. And it's, roughly speaking, it's about a ubiquitous computing football riot after a penalty kick is badly called by a referee. And it's about how all that plays out. I'm not sure if I'll read it in the podcast or not. I think I probably will when I finish Martian Chronicles. There will be a small delay in my reading of Martian Chronicles because I will be abroad for 2 weeks, going away with my family and my extended family, my parents, my brother, sister-in-law, and so on, and seeing my cousins and grandmothers. And so I'll be away from the 23rd of December till about the 11th of January. So I will have an autoresponder on my email saying I'm not reading email during this period, and I'm not reading email that comes in during this period. So forewarned, If you send me email during that period, it's just going straight in the trash. You'll have to email me when I get back. I started doing this after my friend Dana Boyd recommended it. There's nothing worse than coming back from holidays with a huge mountain of email in your inbox. Like, in my case, it would probably be tens of thousands, literally, of messages to go through by the time I got back. It's impossible. It makes you miserable. So, basically, a couple of weeks a year, I'm just not reachable. You can't put something in my queue. You can't speak to me. I think lots of people should try this. I think it's a really good way to go. And I urge you, as you start thinking about your holiday plans, to consider doing this. I think it'd be great. The practical upshot for podcast listeners, of course, is that I won't be doing a podcast for 2 weeks in a row. So next week will be my last podcast, and then there'll be a 2-week hiatus, and then I'll be back with more Martian Chronicles for you. So that's all the news that's print to fit. And now a little more of the Martian Chronicles. And also, I didn't say, VJ's my friend and I'm proud to be his. Instead, I plastered a smile on my face and waved vaguely at him and plucked my way along the walls of the hatch and made for the gravity in the outer rings. Helene came and got me a couple days later, rescuing me from a truly epic sulk in my parents' cabin. "You look like Martian crap," she said. "How is that different from Terran crap?" I asked her. "It's redder, with a slightly longer day, also less gravity." My father chuckled and my mother smiled, and I heard the klaxon go off in the back of my head, the one that went, "Alert, alert, parents are about to say something like, 'Is this your little girlfriend, Brian?'" "Mom, Dad, this is Helene, we're going out now, okay, bye," I said, and grabbed Helene and dragged her down the corridor as fast as I could. From behind me, I heard my parents call sarcastically, "Nice to meet you, Helene," and "Come by any time." And other parents looked at us from their bunks through their open doors as we tore ass toward the hatch that led in-ship, down toward the low-gravity zones. "What is it?" I asked when we were through the airlock that separated the decks. "I've been leaving you messages in-game, but you haven't answered them. Finally, I decided to see when you'd last logged in, and I saw that it had been like 72 hours, and I decided you must have something terminal, so I came to find you so I could tell you my secret before you died." "What secret? You're really a crown prince who was hidden away by the king and queen and sent to live with a provincial bourgeois family so that the grand evil vizier couldn't catch you? You are the rightful heir to the ancient kingdom of Fredonia." "You're weird." She bowed. "Indeed. So, what is it? Cholera? Plague? The crushing ennui of daily existence in a feudal and uncaring universe?" I squirmed. The deck we were on was lightly trafficked. It had a different night than we did. Everyone slept in shifts, and semi-deserted at this hour. I was conscious of the fact that Helene was very pretty, and somehow managed not to smell like the smell, but rather like something slightly floral and nice. I was conscious of the fact that we were alone. I was conscious of the fact that the last time I'd spoken with Helene, I chased her off by treating her to an uninvited lecture on corporate responsibility. "I didn't feel like coming out," I mumbled, staring at my shoes. "Oh, right then," she said. "Okay, back you go. See you later." She began to walk away. I stared at her retreating back. "Wait," I said. She looked over her shoulder at me. "Yes?" "I feel like coming out now," I said. "Oh, all right then. Let's go find VJ." I felt weirdly disappointed. Helene wanted to hang out with me and VJ, which suggested that the half-formed romantic suspicion I'd felt was totally unfounded. Of course. Why would someone as pretty as Helene want anything romantic to do with someone like me? Besides, she was as weird as a sack of snakes, and there was no way to predict what was going on in her pointy little head. I knew, approximately speaking, where VJ's quarters were. The scholarship bunk room, the place where Povs who'd been lucky enough to get a free ride on the Eagle slept, was also at the ship's hub, where there was no gravity to speak of. This allowed for a much higher density of humanity. You didn't need bunks, just loosely tethered cocoons where people slept. VJ had told us about it with a shrug, as if to say it wasn't any worse than his Bangladeshi orphanage, but I'd gotten a vision of a huge space in perpetual twilight, where insectile sacks filled with softly breathing people drifted silently into one another, and it had given me a shiver. "You're sure he's not in the JC lounge?" I asked. "No, he stopped showing up 2 days ago. The lag was killing him." The further we got from Earth, the laggier the game got, as our play traffic had to traverse the widening lightspeed lag between us and the servers twice, once in each direction. Almost immediately after takeoff, we'd lost real-time voice communications with the Dirtside players. We could leave them voicemails and they could reply in the same way, but that was all. Then we lost real-time graphics. Rather than flying through a constantly updated, pin-sharp rendering of the Mars of the Martian Chronicles as it was, we saw it in blocky symbolic graphics covered in glyphs warning us that these buildings and people and vehicles might or might not still be there. Finally, the game turned into a set of spreadsheets that were updated once every minute, filled with vital statistics about market activity, sales, mergers, acquisitions, corporate raids, and as we accelerated farther and farther from our worn-out mother planet, the update lag would be worse and worse. Until apogee, the point where we were at an equal distance from Earth and Mars, when our antennae would be reversed, and we begin 3 months' worth of reverse flight, finally slowing down enough to put us at a relative standstill by the time we reached our new home. At turnaround, the ship's networks would change over to the Martian Internet, a system that was almost entirely separate from Earth's spam-ridden cesspool. The two networks could barely communicate with one another. For one thing, Martian computers reckoned time differently, counting by Martian seconds, which were 1.025 Earth seconds long, just as the Martian day was 2.5% longer than the Earth day. So if you're sure he's not in the JC lounge, are you also sure he's in his quarters? You know VJ, he could be anywhere. It's the tail end of his sleep cycle. He's due to wake up in about 30 minutes. He'll be there. The POV quarters announced themselves with their own smell, a smell distinct from the overarching smell of the eagle. This was the smell of people stuck together so close that every fart blew directly into someone's face. Every toe dangled tantalizing inches from someone's nose. Every armpit was wafting its perfume into someone else's breakfast. As we neared it, we heard the hum, the perpetual sound of 1,000 people whispering, trying not to wake the others who were on sleep shift. The dim room was just as I'd imagined it. Unsurprising, since my impressions were based on candid photos posted to the ship's blog, snapped by colonists who'd snuck down to see how the other half lived. It really was like looking in on a termite's nest or the underside of a rotten log, a swarming mess of half-seen humanity wrapped in gauzy harnesses. "Looks like the POV towns in Martian Chronicles, doesn't it?" Helene said, in a normal conversational voice that cut through the hum like a cymbal crash. I squirmed with embarrassment, mostly because I'd been thinking just that. You could always tell when a Martian Chronicles player was a POV, because they built houses and businesses that looked like POV slums you saw on the news. They were too close together, and they ran businesses right out of their residences, and they always tried to do 3,000 things at once: jetpack repair, accounting services, hairdressing, spacesuit design, all with enthusiastic, badly spelled signage. "Guess," I mumbled, and squinted into the darkness. There was a POV sitting by the door, a man with a little cracked palm top clipped to his flowing white shift. Apparently the backlight had gone. He was reading it by the light leaking in from the doorway, which we were blocking by standing there, gawping. He made an impatient gesture at us. Come in," he said, in accented English. Maybe it was African. It sounded like the African accents in the games I'd played. We scooted past him, and we were enveloped in the close, overbreathed air of the POV quarters. I had the same feeling I got when I stumbled into POV towns in Martian Chronicles. Claustrophobia, nausea, and an awful, nagging guilt. And then anger. Why were we taking the POVs to Mars anyway? Meanwhile, Helene was floating through the space, peering at people's faces, looking for VJ. "Found him," she sang out, again too loud for the space, and people rolled over in their cocoons and gave us dirty looks. I drifted over to her, grinning weakly at VJ, who was scrubbing at his eyes with his long, skinny hands. "Hello," he whispered. "Funny meeting you here." He struggled out of his cocoon, and I saw that he was wearing gray underpants and a t-shirt, and I looked away as he snagged his clothes from the ditty bag under the cocoon and pulled them on. "Toilet," he said, and led us out of Povland. There was a huge line for the nearest toilet, but he sailed past it and led us down a maintenance corridor that was barely wide enough to pass down, even turned sideways. "'Excuse me," he said, and ducked into a niche I hadn't even seen. A moment later, I heard the P+ vacuum sound of a low-G toilet. "I think they used this while they were building the Eagle," he called over the noise, seemingly unembarrassed by having an audience for his toilet experience. "It's not even on the as-built drawings, but they must have had a toilet when they were working, after they pressurized her. Before pressure, everyone would have worked in spacesuits and gone in a diaper." He emerged, fastidiously wiping his fingers on a Santa wipe that he tucked into the waistband of his loose cotton pants. "Okay," he said. "Onward, stout comrades." He led us further up the corridor, and I found myself growing heavier, a sense of downhill that told me we were headed into the higher G outer rings. I heard muffled conversations from beyond the thin bulkhead, snatches of conversation in simplified English, and then in Spanish, which the crew spoke when there weren't any colonists around. They were mostly Mexicans, POVs really, and they were getting a free ride to Mars and a free start as colonists in exchange for driving the big tin can across the solar system for us. "Where are we?" Helene said, in her stupid loud voice. "Quiet, please," Vijay said, without rancor. "Crew quarters. This corridor goes all the way back from the center to the outer ring. This is about as far as you can go before you start sliding downhill, though. I thought it'd be fun to come back sometime and do it again with pythons and ropes. See if we can get all the way down to the passenger decks without falling straight down and breaking both legs." "That does sound like fun," Helene said. "Count me in." "You too," I said. But it did sound like fun. We had months left in this tin can, and spending it all playing Martian Chronicles didn't sound nearly as much fun as it had when we'd actually left for Mars. "Okay, Vijay, you're officially the coolest guy in outer space. Can we go now? It'd be nice to actually be able to see you guys rather than the backs of your heads." We were all turned sideways, remember. There wasn't even enough room to turn our heads. "Don't you want to know what I learned here in my secret perch in crew territory?" He was barely speaking above a whisper. We were all keeping it quietly, but he managed to convey unholy glee. "Do tell!" Helene hissed in a very loud whisper, like a whispered shout. The voices outside the walls got quieter, and we all held our breath for a second. Then they got louder again. "Well, I speak some Spanish," Vijay said. "Just a little, but it's helpful in Martian Chronicles to be able to audit a company's books in the language that they're kept in, and there are so many Mexican and South American corps now in MC. "Farmers," I snorted. Everyone knew that the Spanish-speaking corps were just fronts for farmers, players that did mind-numbing, repetitive tasks in-game to amass wealth that they could sell to real players who didn't want their transactions to show up on the official registry. I could hear Vijay's silence from further up the corridor, just make out his shoulders tightening. "Many of them are very good firms," he said, "operating under the highest ethical standards." I opened my mouth to say something that would defend my position, but Helene spoke before I could. "You were saying, Vijay?" "Yes, well, the thing is, the crew are very active MC players, and they have access to the Martian internet." "Jesus," I said, "that must be laggy as hell." "Oh yes," Vijay said, "about 200 seconds of network delay, but that's plenty fast enough to let them get a look at Martian Chronicles." "They're logging in?" "Oh yes, logging in and even joining up." Oh, there's Edelweiss. Must be 11:30. "Oh yes, logging in and even joining up with corps. They want to be sure that by the time they land, they have a good position. Think about it. Once we hit apogee and switch the Eagle's main systems over to the Martian internet, there's going to be 1,000 colonists all trying to get in with the corps or found their own, all at once. They're beating the rush." "But that's cheating," I said, too loud, and the voices outside again dipped. "Go," whispered Vijay, quietly. Quietly, we backed down the corridor, turning around to face the way we were going only when we reached Vijay's secret toilet. We popped back out near Povland, and Vijay floated up to the ceiling and gestured to us to join him. We put our faces close together and spoke softly. "I'm sorry," I said, "but it is cheating." "No, it's not," Helene said. "They're just taking advantage of the circumstances. Look at the colonists who went up on the Falcon." That was the first Mars Inc. colony ship, which made the voyage 10 years before. They got to set up Marside Martian Chronicles without anyone else in the way. They had a totally blank world. They could mine the best mineral deposits, grab the best mountains to hollow out and pressurize, stake out the best oxygen patches. Are they cheating? Should they have waited for us to get there before they started? I swallowed. "It's not the same thing," I said, but I didn't sound very convincing. Helene waved her hand at me in a dismissive, floppy gesture. "What did you find out from them, Vijay?" But before he could speak, she put her finger to her lips. "Brian, you might want to move out of earshot until we're done here. I wouldn't want you to get tainted by all this cheating." "Children," Vijay said with mock sternness. "Enough." I glanced at Helene, who smiled at me with so much dimple and lip action that I found myself blushing. "Sorry," I mumbled. Now, what I discovered was this. The Marside game is almost nothing like the game we play. It's a lot meaner, and raiding is the order of the day. 4 corps control the entire show, and every corp has to pay tribute to one of them for a license to operate or face financial ruin. The 4 main corps hate each other, but they'll work in concert to destroy any independent corp that threatens their arrangement. Anything it takes. Price fixing, unfair advertising, market lockouts. He went on, rattling off a long list of sins that only the auditors truly understood. Basically, these were all the ways that a corp could try too hard, like when all the corps in one sector, like oxygen, do exclusive deals with all the Mars habitats to supply their air at a discount on the condition that the habitats agree not to buy water from some other corp. This was strictly forbidden on Martian Chronicles, Earthside at least, though of course people were always trying it. So that's the shape of things, he concluded. The Eagles crew are trying to work out, from the spreadsheets and the news bulletins they're getting from the Mars servers, which of the 4 corps they should go to work for. They've decided to offer themselves as a team, thinking that they'll get higher wages if they all stand together. I shook my head. That's collusion, I said. If there was one thing that was even more against the rules that I'd always lived under than unfair competition, it was labor collusion, when a bunch of workers decided in secret to hold out for a higher wage, or to stop some of their friends from being fired, or having their hours cut. It wasn't just illegal in Martian Chronicles, it was illegal on Mars, one of the fundamental tenets of Mars Inc.'s charter. Totally free labor markets. It's a different game on Mars, Vijay said. Besides, what's really wrong with it? A company puts a lot of workers together so that it can earn more profits. Why shouldn't workers get together to earn more wages? Helene raised her eyebrows at me, as though to say, do you have an answer? One that you're okay saying in front of Vijay? I tightened my lips. Vijay, can I say something to you without worrying that you'll be all offended? He smiled and bobbed up and down in null G. Of course, Brian. You're my friend. Let it all hang out. What you're talking about is pure POV talk. The world has 2 kinds of people in it, whiners and winners. A winner goes out and starts a company and figures out how to make as much as possible. A whiner complains that the winner isn't paying him enough, and rather than starting his own company, complains and demands more money from the winner. The real way to get higher pay is to take a risk, start your own business, make something important in the world. I checked to see if he was offended. He was floating upside down, so it was hard to tell if he was smiling or not. Okay, so this is why you can always find the POVs in Martian Chronicles. They're the ones bitching about the unfairness of everything instead of doing something. It's why there are so many poor people on Earth. It's a thought virus that they all catch from their society, demanding that the world provide for them, instead of providing for themselves. And it's the job of the doers and the winners to ignore the whiners and go on doing and winning so that the whiners have somewhere to work. Vijay looked at me with something like a mild smile on his face. I replayed my words and heard just how offensive it might sound to someone like Vijay. Look, I said, no longer meeting his gaze. Look, I'm not saying it's genetic. No one's saying that poor people are inherently inferior or anything, but it's a disease, and you catch it from the people around you. Helene shook her head at me. You really believe everything your dad tells you, don't you? I nearly turned around and left then, but I was still keenly aware of the loneliness I'd experienced for the 3 days I'd spent locked up in my parents' cabinet. So I stood my ground and pretended I hadn't heard her. Vijay said, I've heard this theory before, but there is only one thing I wonder about. Maybe you could help me with it. Go ahead, I said. Can you explain where the people who died in the Procter & Gamble leak were whiners? I shook my head. No, of course not, but... Do you have any idea how many workers I've met who are missing fingers or eyes or hands? How many of them were called whiners and sent away because they asked their employers for compensation for the machines that mutilated them? I shook my head again. You don't get it. No, Vijay said, and I heard that the calm voice he used, that he always used, was just a tight belt cinched around an enormous pool of anger. That Vijay was angry at me, at the colonists, at all of us. No, Brian, I do get it. Do you know what cognitive dissonance is? We'd studied it in school, but I hadn't paid a lot of attention. It's like when you believe something and the facts don't agree with it. That's right. So say, for example, that you believe that the world is fair, but when you look around it, you see that you have so very much more than everyone else. I could see where this was going. I began to walk away, but he floated and skipped after me, continuing to talk. So you have cognitive dissonance. How can the world be fair if you have so much more than everyone else? It must be fair for you to have more then, right? And how can that be? It can only be if you are better than everyone else, and everyone else is therefore worse than you. I reached the hatch and passed through it and moved out toward the living quarters, downhill in the gravity. For some reason, there were tears in my eyes. All right, gang. Talk to you next week. Have a really good week. You've been listening to the Cory Doctorow podcast, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike US 3.0, or as Woody Guthrie put it in another context, This song is copyrighted in the U.S. under seal of copyright 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anyone caught singing it without our permission will be a mighty good friend of ourn, because we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it, we wrote it, that's all we wanted to do. Many thanks to John Taylor Williams for mastering. That's Ryneck Studio, WRYNECK Studio at gmail.com. John Taylor Williams is a full-time self-employed audio engineer, producer, composer, and sound designer. In his free time, he makes beer, jewelry, odd musical instruments, and furniture. He likes to meditate, to read, and to cook. Talk to you next week.